Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Horns of Odin. And as always, before we get to today's show, I do have to do a plug for our Patreon. It is how we keep the lights on. It starts from £3 a month and you get a bonus episode every single week, which comes in the form of our Q&A, which is basically where you get to ask a question of the guest after the main show. They're always a lot of fun. You can listen to them back after the fact if you can't join live. But typically a lot of questions get asked in there that I miss or maybe overlook. So the patrons and the people watching live get to ask those questions in real time. And there is a ton of extra information that always comes along. So they are worth listening to after, and they're just an extension of the main show. And you also get the story time with Jonas Lorentzen that we do, which are a lot of fun. And the tier up from that, you also get a few bonus episodes, one that we do with creators, which is our creator episode where we get a person from the Viking crafts world to show us and teach us their craft. And then we also do one with Claire Moulet, which I'm going to be doing today, where we've decided to call it the apt and not very creative Weird Norse bonus episode, because basically what we do is we look at an Icelandic saga and pick a really weird and strange tale from them and go into it. So last week's was about a gentleman hiding in the toilets, being haunted, and I can't remember his name, but it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. A lot of people really liked it. So again, you get all these and you can listen to them after the fact. So just pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast. And like I say, it does help us keep things going. And if anybody would like to sponsor the podcast, we're always looking for that. That's something we're actively looking for now. So any smaller businesses, please just send us a message on any of the platforms and we can look at that. But that's me rambling for long enough. Let's get to today's episode, which I am really looking forward to. This is a topic I find fascinating. So today's guest is Albert Björn Shiell. I don't know why I panic fucking every time. It's the easiest name to say and I panic every time and I don't know why I do it. It's become a huge thing. So Albert Björn Shiell, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So do you want to just let people know, what you do?
So I'm more into the sort of weirdy woo-woo side of witchy Viking-y stuff.
I love that. I have a soft spot for anything occult as well. That's what I really like.
That's very much my realm. I'm an author. And I'm an amateur folklorist in that I love it rather than have like any formal sort of education in it. I have written a book on plant magic, which is essentially breaking down like plant folklore. That's the thing that I focus on most is, British and Icelandic and other like Scandinavian plant folklore as well. I've written now 2 books. My second one is on wider sort of Icelandic folk magic in general. I've been practicing this sort of weirdy, witchy stuff for the last 18 years.
Oh, cool.
Started in Sussex, where I'm from. And then when I moved to Iceland, I sort of fell in with the right people and was able to learn more. Now I'm mostly I'm writing various things, articles and books and things, doing sort of divination stuff, readings and things for people. Mostly just sort of now writing and presenting and teaching classes about witchcraft and Icelandic folk magic. Sort of become my brand now, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Which then also as an immigrant in Iceland as well, it's that's something that I'm trying to balance trying to balance the thing of
mm-hmm.
Can I claim this or should I not? Because although I wasn't raised in this culture, I'm very much involved in it. And I've been living here now for about 8 years. So it's it's my home, but it's also I don't want to take that space away from other people talking about this, but I haven't really, it's such a small country. I know all the other people talking about this stuff. So it's, I don't know, it's very strange. That's sort of the niche that I guess I've fallen into. But I love it. I love staves and plants and just weird stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to focus mainly on staves to start with. And then I would love to talk about the plant magic, folk, plant, all that universe if we get time. If not, we'll make it into its own podcast because I hate rushing like extra subjects on the back of the main one. But this is something that I love, but I'd never know where I sit belief wise. And that's why I kind of love it so much, because I don't know where I sit belief wise. And I also don't really practice anything when it comes to witchcraft side, but also I'm so interested in it and I'm fascinated by it. And I think it's an amazing thing to kind of learn about. So I love just having these conversations and seeing, where I fall and what kind of maybe turns me and makes me think differently.
Yeah, I
So,
think on those lines, like this, just it's this thing of, because I'm skeptical of everything I do with this as well, and I feel like that's, for me, that's the sort of gauge of when you can tell whether someone is talking about this stuff and like they've sort of like drunk Kool-Aid and they've gone way off into this other world of witchy stuff, or whether they're quite grounded, because there's so much. I'm like always questioning all of these things, and although I'm doing this, making staves for people as well, and readings and stuff, I'm always like trying to be very as as balanced with it as I can, and I feel like I'm quite a normal person, like in my everyday life. So it's that's definitely a thing I've noticed, that it's quite a tell of like, if people, there's quite a lot of people I've seen who go like crazy far, especially on social media, and I'm a little bit like, oh, I don't even know if I believe this, and I'm doing this for like a living. So
that's the thing, because obviously we don't want to offend anyone, but we all have probably come across or can imagine that type of person who like you say, has kind of drank the Kool-Aid, has gone very far. And it also almost kind of gives it a bad name, because it is so out there that for most people, or certainly I can speak for myself, like mostly I just switch off to it. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I mean, I'm not a rude person, so I'll always listen to what people have to say and I nod my head politely. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, really? So, come on. So that's why when it's fun to have a conversation with somebody who is very grounded and quote unquote, normal, it makes it a fun conversation, because I can be on a level, but also I'm like, oh, question it from my own side, because I don't know where I sit. But you can have these very real conversations, and it's not going to be met with kind of weird woo-woo, as you maybe put earlier.
Yeah.
So actually, I wanted to ask you about the lovely name Albert. That's where I wanted to start, because you don't see many young Alberts. I don't think I've ever met. To be fair, I don't think I've ever met an Albert, and let alone, I mean, I don't want to ask you your age, but you certainly don't look 80.
Yeah. I've only actually met one other Albert in my life, actually. I used to hate my name when I was growing up. Like, it's a really old man name. So in school in the UK, it was like,
oh, I
hated it. I was just like, why did my parents do this to me? Which then also maybe it's a bit questionable, because my mum is very like, I have three younger brothers, and we're all named after like kings or princes. All of us like very working class family, so I don't quite know how my mum sort of like did the mental gymnastics with that, but like
maybe it was just wishful thinking. She was like, if I give them a regal names, then what can go? They have to excel to something.
Yeah, I like that actually. Yeah, I'll take that. But yeah, no, I hated it. And then when I moved here, it's like, it's a pretty common, well, not like pretty common, but it's more of a common Icelandic name than it is in the UK. So there's quite a lot of, I mean, there are more like Albertsons than there are Alberts, but like,
yeah,
there are still more Alberts than there are Alberts in the UK that I've met. So
I have to ask, how many Prince Albert jokes have you had across your life? Because especially, I mean, I was gonna say at school, but then again, I don't know how many kids would know of the Prince Albert, but certainly as an adult. And am I right that you're a gay man as well?
Yeah.
So that must come up a lot.
Yeah, that's been like a lot less here actually since I've moved here, but in the UK for sure more.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite common. Okay, so so we're gonna that took a turn. I just couldn't help because, like, say, I think you are genuinely the first Albert I've ever met, and I had to ask, like, because usually you find people they hate the name when they're younger, and then as they grow up into adults and probably get out of the school system where kids can be little pricks, start to then like a name because it is something different and not something you hear everybody else.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we're gonna mainly look at the Icelandic staves, which I think most people are gonna know what they are. But can you maybe give a basic explanation of what an Icelandic stave is?
Yeah, so symbols that are like the origin is always a bit sort of questioned as to whether it's runes or whether it's Solomonic sort of like ceremonial high magic symbols and things like that. But it's a symbol that you either a symbol that you've created or a symbol that you know has very certain like does a very certain task or like does a specific thing. Um, Sort of like if people know sigils, that's the more sort of wider talked about, especially like in lots of different occult spheres. Sigils is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's yeah, like sort of it's to me, it's Iceland's answer to continental grimoire tradition and ceremonial magic, which was from what like 15 maybe well 1200s to sort of 1600s. It was a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's yeah, I think a lot of it, like I'll go into this more a bit later, but like a lot of it I think comes from priests, or like the learned people. Anyone who could read in Iceland was seeing these sort of symbols coming from books on the continent, and they were like, oh, these look like runes and we could do different things with these. And then it's a big, for me it's a big fusion between sort of older Nordic stuff of runes in general, and this idea of this sort of like Christian mysticism, Solomonic stuff. There's so much. It's tough to like to say exactly as well because it's like we don't know
Mm-hmm.
really what like the influence of these was like, but it's very likely that it was this. Yeah, so rune symbols that do things basically, but not
Okay.
entirely runes and not always runes. Yeah,
It's complicated. I feel like, which is
yeah,
pretty much the anyway. I guess it is the motto of the podcast because everything is complicated when it comes to anything to do with this sphere, Viking Age, after the Viking Age, everything. It's just all so complex. So I think for most part, would the Vegvisir and the Helm of All both be? Are they Icelandic staves? Because I feel like they're the
yeah.
ones that most people would know.
Yeah. So they're Icelandic staves. Those two examples, especially in the Huld manuscript, that's from 1860. So like it's a lot later. But like just because it's later doesn't mean that it doesn't have something to it. And that's the sort of vibe. There are loads of really old books that contain staves that are in the what's it called? The manuscript library. What's the word? I can't remember the word. I'm forgetting every Icelandic word I learn. I forget an English word, and it's becoming a bit of a stress now. But where they keep on the manuscripts, there are some that are really, really old there that they have various copies of these manuscripts that have a bunch of staves on. But a lot of the sort of more commonly used ones are from like collections where people have gone through these, copied them out, written out their instructions, and then you have a bunch of manuscripts that are collections of staves that are much later. So you have Vegvisir and Æsjalmur and quite a few others, like the Draumstafur. There's like some dream staves. There's all these different ones in the whole manuscript that to look at as well. You would think like because you can't like mentally age paper when it looks old. It's just old.
Yeah.
And so to look at these staves on these bits of paper, it's like, oh, this could be super, super old. When actually, I mean, it's 1860, so it's not like yesterday, but it's still, it's not really, really super old ancient symbols. But they are staves. Yeah, sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's fine. Because without doubt, those two are the most popular, or most famous, most well known. But also, they're the most popular, quote unquote, Viking symbols. Like they're for some reason these two Icelandic staves have just becomes synonymous with the Vikings. And, it's a hot topic of debate online. I'm sure every single day on Facebook, I'm sure there are people arguing over these two symbols. And yeah, any idea why these two in particular maybe have become this iconic thing?
I think so there was an article, was it Oliver Davidson? There was like a folklorist who collected a bunch of these staves. I think it was Oliver Davidson, who's a folklorist. I think it was him. He wrote an article in a German magazine in, I think, oh my God, when it was before World War II, so like 1930. Oh my God, I'm really bad with dates. It was before World War II. Yeah. He wrote an article in a German magazine. And I think like a bunch of the sort of popularity of it may come from that, because that was then one of the main places that these symbols were then seen in Europe, and then like sort of, what's the word, like spread out around Europe. And then you have Stephen Flowers, who wrote his book on Icelandic magic, which, when you know more about it, there's quite a lot of error, and a bit that's a bit.
Are you trying to be polite?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to shit talk. But
I mean, you can if you want. It's
for my sake. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I should be polite.
You know what? I feel like on an earlier episode somebody did shit talk, so I wouldn't worry too much. I can't remember who it was, but I'm sure somebody at some point will let me know. But yeah, I feel like somebody did, so maybe you don't have to. It's already been done.
Okay, nice. I think since his work then was using these, or talking about these staves and then looking into other manuscripts, then it became a lot more popular. But I think if we look a bit further back to what his source was, which mostly was this article in a German magazine, because German's easier to translate than Icelandic, so that makes sense. Then I think since then it's been more of sort of in the public realm. Because I can't really think of any, at least that I know, which like obviously I don't know everything, but I can't think of any examples of these specific staves being used or like looked at before, I don't know, like early 1900s. Like I can't think of a thing where I've seen them. There's lots of similar like runic like symbols and stuff on runestones and various other things, but like these specific symbols, I don't think I've seen mentioned really anywhere before, like outside of Iceland, before this article. So yeah, I think maybe that I think that article is probably the thing that shot them to fame.
Yeah,
for all that I know.
But it is very fascinating how these two just seem to become their whole different thing. Really, they've become they have at this point become their own symbol in their own right, and they've kind of got their own meanings to them now, and they are forever linked to the Vikings, whether you like it or not.
Which that's really interesting, actually, when you talk about sort of like the mechanics of how like the magic side of stuff works with belief and stuff, and how people's, this is not everyone's school of thought, but how like an amount of perception around a thing can change that thing to mean that thing, like in pop culture, but as well as like magically, maybe it's like, maybe they weren't like, maybe if they weren't powerful at the time they were made, maybe they're powerful now because people at least acknowledge what they mean, whether they think it means a Viking compass or like whether they actually read the inscription, which is safe travel over, I think it's through bad weather and over sea. But then bad weather, that could be translated as just like bad times, bad days. So there's, I don't know. It's interesting to think about the power of collective human thought and how that changes stuff.
Absolutely, because I think obviously the most famous example of that is the swastika. Like that had a very different meaning pre World War II. Like it was a symbol of good luck and prosperity, I guess. But from World War II onwards, it has a very different meaning. And in my mind, it's changed forever. Obviously, you occasionally get these people who, for their intention is good, of like, let's take back the swastika. And what's the intention? I think the intention behind it is good. I think this symbol now has just changed. You have to kind of go, okay, it's just
I think
not.
it's more work to get to change it than any group of people could really ever do, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just become its own thing, and that. But it is that same thing of like, things happen, and they change public perception of it changes because there is no doubt that when anybody sees the swastika in any particularly like the Western world, if you see it in any instance, kind of makes you recoil. It's just a very triggering thing. You see it and you kind of go, "Ooh, what's that doing there?" Why it just automatically makes you kind of just pick up and take notice, and it has such power behind it, probably more than it ever had. As like I'm not sure the exact origins. Was it like a Buddhist symbol maybe? But like
I think that's it, that it was a piece or something, and then it was reverted, or I don't know enough about. I mean, runes also, like staves are my thing. Runes and older symbols are not so much my my remit.
I have a bad habit of just going off on tangents. My brain will just pull something out of the air, and I'm like, "Ooh, let's follow this idea," and the guests have no idea about it. I'm like, "Well, we can just figure it out, surely." Okay, so if we go back to just staves, they're typically like line symbols, I guess. They're just single lines, almost bind rune looking, I guess.
Yeah.
Would be what most people maybe think of.
I think that's the thing for me of because I that's a question I get a lot of, like, what's the difference between a stave and a bind rune? And for me personally, the way that I make them, it's like it's in the way that they're made. Because bind runes, you have you take a couple of runes that together could then mean the thing that you want it to mean, or do the thing you want it to do. But a stave is more, for me, like staves and how they're made. There's a lot of that. This is the whole thing. So back in the 1900s, there was a guy called Austin Osman Spare, who he wrote loads of books on chaos magic and this sort of flavor of occultism that was like a lot to do with subconscious stuff. And you would create these symbols and you create a symbol that is like, you take an abstract concept and you break it down and then rearrange, like you take the letters of it and you break those letters down and you rearrange them into like a symbol or a shape. And then that has the meaning of the original sentence. And you're supposed to sort of internalize it and then forget it, because it's supposed to work like in your unconscious mind, and you sort of will attract whatever the desired result is. You will attract that to you if you do this specific thing with this symbol. And there's ways that you can use that sort of method to create staves, which is that's the main sort of way that I do it. Of like, you start with a concept, you break these letters down. Instead of like the Roman alphabet, I'll swap these letters out for, like, in all these manuscripts, there's like tons and tons of alphabets of like sort of runic looking code, secret language type alphabets. And so I'll just swap these letters out, break those symbols down, which then you obviously have like a lot more to work with than just simple lines, and you can build this picture from it. I don't think that's the way that they would have been made, like originally, like way in the past. But that is definitely one way that they can be made. But I think I'm going off now on another thing.
No. That's what we're here for.
Like the way that they probably would have been made in the past, and why they're different to bind runes. There's a lot of them that don't look like bind runes, or even really like runes, because you have these sort of squiggles and lines and various things that don't show up.
Yeah, I think that's what I would notice as, very much of an outsider, is you tend to get curved lines, whereas most runes, I guess for carving purposes, are all very straight lined. I think you can think of maybe a couple that have curves. So like the B in the Younger Fudak tends to be more curved, but not many. A lot of them are just all very angular. Whereas with staves, you do get those kind of more swirly patterns, I guess. Yeah.
And you have some staves that are just like, they don't really look like anything. Like in these manuscripts, there are some that are like, it just looks like someone's random signature. And you're like, how did you get that symbol? Where did that come from? And like, what method are you using to make these things? So I think honestly, a lot of either a lot of it came from, if it were these priests that were making them, which I really do think that sort of the Catholic period in Iceland from 1000 to 1500 is like, there was a lot of stuff going on there. It was very, very war-y and people were fighting all the time. And then when Lutheranism, that's how you say that, I think, right? Lutheranism.
Yeah,
when that came in, then like they sort of executed all these Catholic bishops and higher people because they wouldn't convert to the Lutheran Church. And so you have like this time period from like 15 to 1700s where there was, to me, looking at it and reading this stuff, it seems like then you have a lot of these like Catholic priests who like are remembered in this sort of way as like these sort of like demonic entities who were like these evil priests who made all these staves and went to this like devil school, supposedly in France. And like there's all this weird stuff that's like later talked about as, I think, as like a propaganda way to sort of make the people, like the Lutheran people, remember why they're Lutheran and not the evil Catholics. And so you have like a lot of the staves that were made in this time period. Then there's a lot more like, oh, these are demonic evil from these like ye olde priests who would do all this weird devil rune magic and like, which is super interesting. But it's just, I don't know, it's this. Yeah, I'm going off another tangent, but like it's this thing of the staves that you do have that don't look like anything else. They could be Solomonic symbols because you have all the seals of Solomon as well, which I should have found some books to like show pictures because it's probably a bit easier. But you have all the seals of Solomon, which they're Christian mysticism, and they come, I think, 12th century or even earlier maybe. But you have all these symbols that are made of these sort of different symbols that represent different planets in the solar system and stuff. And you have this whole other system of magic that then maybe was sort of like by these priests who would have read these books and learned about this stuff. Maybe then they were like, oh, we have this other interesting system of magic with runes and all these various symbols. If we mix these together, maybe we'll have something even more powerful. I don't know. Maybe that was
just mega magic.
Yeah, like, and I think that's where they come from of this sort of idea of like, oh, well, we have this ancient connection to all these runes and stuff, and if we use these with these symbols, then it's like, wow, we're going to be the most powerful whatever. But I think there's something to that personally.
Yeah. Well, obviously you mentioned Solomonic a couple of times, and it's something that I've heard all the time. Like obviously the lesser key of Solomon and all the little bit. And I figured whilst you were here, I have to ask you, like, what is all that? I know you touched on it a little bit then, but like, because it does, you do, every time you like magic and obviously the Icelandic staves, you hear it spoke about and woven in. And I don't know what it is. And I would love someone to tell me.
That's the thing. That's also not my area of expertise, but at least there's a whole chunk of magic from like early modern. So what? Yeah, probably. Well, so from 1200 to sort of 1700s, you have this whole time period where people made all these sort of grimoires containing various symbols to like summon a spirit to do this thing for you, or it's the same sort of vibe of like you have these manuscripts from Iceland where it's like carve the stave into this cheese and someone will eat it and they'll fall in love with you, and it's like very sort of wild, weird stuff. Lots of interesting claims of especially with symbols of things like this symbol summons this spirit that will do this thing for you, or it will call upon this energy of this planet that like then you have. This is so much to go into, but like you have the sort of the system of planetary magic where you'll have each of the 7 classical planets before people knew there were more. And also the sun is a planet and the moon is a planet in this system. And you have each of these things represent different stuff. And this comes from like way back, like Middle Eastern astrology that then came into like Greece and Roman classic stuff and then was translated and then like spread through Europe. There's so much to it, but you have sort of these the planets do different things. So like the moon is the ruler of emotions, which, you know, now we know because we know that's true because science has proven that the moon affects your mood. or can affect your mood. And then there's so much to it. Like the sun is the sort of the king of the solar system because it's this big bright light, and it represents courage and divinity and all these things. And you can break all these things down, which is the same system that I use for plant stuff, which is, we'll talk about that another time.
But I feel like we're not going to get to that today.
Yeah. It's the base, at least like a lot of the planetary magic stuff. It's the base of most Western occultism. And people don't even really realize this when they're buying like a crystal that is pink that they will use for like a love spell. And it's like, well, why do we use this like rose quartz pink crystal for a love spell? Because it's pink, and this is a color devoted to this planet, which is Venus, which is all about love. And there's all these ways to sort of tie these things back. Okay. This is so much like this is where like
I feel like there is a whole lifetime learning about this. But I love it because as a kid, or like as a probably as like a young adult, young man, whatever. I was probably very close-minded about all this stuff. I was that typical like quote masculine male, rugby playing, go to the gym, very kind of like, oh, that's all that shit is just like voodoo, or like people who believe in like astrology are a little bit weird, like very kind of naive, and that, that typical mindset a lot of people probably have. And then, as you grow older and you have life experiences that happen, and you just hope maybe there is something after, or all these things, you kind of become a little bit softer around the edge because you go through life and realize that not everything is black and white. Not everything can be just explained by science, because that's kind of what we're taught in schools, is that science already has all the answers. So as you're growing up as a kid, you get to like 16, 17, you think that science already has all the answers. And unless you have come from a family who teach the more kind of spiritual side of things, which I didn't come from. I came from a very typical kind of working class family. This stuff would have been classed as a bit weird and odd probably in my household when I was a kid. So I never learned about that. I left school thinking science had already explained everything. There weren't any question marks. We know everything. We're super smart as a species. Like there's nothing to learn. And then you go into the big world and go, oh shit, actually there's a lot of stuff that's not really explained. And this stuff's quite cool. And maybe it does work, whether it's just through intent or there is a genuine magic to there. But wow. And then what's the difference? If it works, it works.
I think that's the thing often for quite a lot of stuff, is that like if the end goal happens, like what does it matter whether it was real or not? Like for me personally, it's like I'm very logical, and I'm very what's the word, like skeptical of all of this stuff anyway. And I'll be like, right, okay, I'm gonna do this spell for this thing, make this stave for this thing, and like I'll be like, okay, I'm going to test it like a scientific experiment of like, I'll do it a couple of times. If it works, maybe that's that. I don't know. But I'm always very like, I won't be like, oh, I've done this and it worked 100% and that's that. Like, because I don't think that's how stuff works really in the world for many things. But yeah, like I think that's a very healthy thing to have like to keep that skepticism and to be grounded in it, because otherwise it is a bit dangerous actually to sort of just go off like off the deep end with it. But actually then also like science and magic were the same thing like at one point, and especially like 1500s, you have all these occult philosophers who were also mathematicians and early scientists, and like the first physicists, not physicists as we know, but like physics as medicine and all these sort of things. And you had like this real like connection of all of these things. And so then it would have been seen at this point in the like with Agrippa and people like that in like 1500s, you had all these people who were writing books on like the sort of mechanics of the universe as well as like maths. And it's really, and like that for them, it was all different pieces of the same puzzle, and it was really interesting. Which like in folk magic, that's also the thing of like the sympathy of does this like in doing this action, does that mean that the same action will happen like in something else in life? So like, by doing like a healing spell or something that would use like various different things that would represent like what needed to be healed, like if then that healing happens to that person, is it like you've done something with this thing? And like through the sympathy of that, I'm trying to think of a really specific example, like like there's various herbs and stuff, but like well, okay, so like early medicine and folk magic where you have like cloves, and so like little like dried cloves, they look like rotten teeth. And if you chew them, they have like an antiseptic, is it, no, anesthetic, that's the word, anesthetic effect. And it's like, they look like the thing that they like relieve you
Okay. Yeah.
from.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you.
And so there's been loads of stuff like that where now you have like science has backed up, like, oh, this thing that looks like this thing does this thing to our bodies. Is it just a coincidence that like this leaf that's shaped like a kidney is like really good for your kidney? Or like there's all this weird stuff, which also then really makes you question of like, how does this plant look like this thing that's inside my body that this plant would never, like, if even this plant like had eyes, would never, do you know what I mean? It's like there's so many weird coincidences. So I'm like, it's about like a delicate balancing act of like trying to be like very open and curious and very skeptical at the same time.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's unfortunate that in the mainstream, a lot of this stuff does just get kind of put as been like hocus pocus, like not spoken about because everything's all about science. But I think that even, in the 1500s, those people probably thought they knew pretty much everything. And they're like, oh, we know everything. We know how all this stuff works. And I think it's very naive of us to think that we know everything now. Yeah, and in 500 years, they're probably going to look back on us and think they were doing things a little bit odd. Like that stuff. So maybe they're going to think it was kind of like a type of magic because everything's going to advance and our understanding is going to be so much better. And they're going to look back on us and go, the fuck were they doing? That was maybe even think it was quite barbaric, some of the stuff we're doing. So, I think, I think it's very naive for us to sit here and think that we have all the answers. And especially when we have moved away from a lot of the natural side of things, without getting into the issues with big pharma, we've moved away from all the natural remedies and gone very much chemical for everything, which
it's so interesting. Like, and that's the thing as well of like, there's a lot of people then who are like, yeah, be the most like do the most sort of like herbal medicine you can over like modern medicine, and it's like, well, no, like we need to really sort of look at both because now we can like isolate compounds from within this like toxic plant to like treat heart disease that like if we just ate the plant you would have a heart attack and die. And so there's all this stuff of like I mean that's one example of like a very specific plant, but like there's all these things of like there's so many arguments to really balancing everything and keeping all these things like juggling all these things at the same time. That's what I try to do at least.
It's a symbiosis but between the two. You can have science and you can have natural remedies and put them together. Now I would never advocate anybody who's like only take natural remedies because there's a lot of modern stuff that is really going to help you, but probably the other way around. I think you would be very naive to go, I'm only going to take modern pharmaceuticals and not be willing to look at the other side of things. But we're going to get off topic and kind of sit in the middle between two. So we'll save the plant stuff and try to get back to... No, because it is such a fascinating thing and I can't wait for you to come back where we can talk about just that side of things. But back to the stave. So we kind of got a basic understanding of what a stave is and the stuff around it. So you kind of create a stave to imbue an action. Is it so you would make it and then draw in that? Would it be that you, I guess maybe the how you use them would have changed over time, but would it be that you like just write it on a piece of paper and put it somewhere and it works, or would you have to like write it on the object that you want? Like that's
the thing of like, I feel like there's so many different ways you can do it. if you want to keep like to real traditional instructions, there are some that are like so outlandishly like impossible to meet, where it's like take a drop of blood from a seal, a dog, a cat, and a fox, and your left pinky, and like mix it together and draw it on like a piece of silver. And it's like, which like sounds so completely outlandish and wild, but like looking at like stuff like ceremonial magic and grimoire traditions from Europe, you can see either this is stuff that like the people who were making these and writing these instructions out were taking directly from that, because you have these sort of crazy recipes of like to make an incense to like call on the power of the planetary energy of the sun. People like Agrippa in their recipes write like you need to get a cockerel's brain and like frankincense and like mash them up in like a certain time at a certain place, and like it's like sort of fantasy wizard magic, which like it's cool and it sounds interesting. It's massively impractical. So I think like a lot of the sort of traditional methods for using these things were inspired by this sort of like very outlandish, crazy stuff coming from the continent.
So do you think people actually did them though? Like so
I think people probably got as close to fulfilling these instructions as they could. Like I think.
Well, I mean, if you write anything down, people will do it, won't they? If they believe in it, if you write anything, people will.
That's the thing as well. Like I'm like when I'm writing about this, I'm trying to like, okay, what alternatives can I offer people that isn't like get like, I don't know, like blood from a cat. I'm like, oh no, I'm vegan anyway, so a lot of this is very like not something that I would want to endorse. So it's funny, but like I think for me, the way that the takeaway that I would get from all of these instructions, like blood is a big thing of like using your own blood, like a drop of your own blood to draw these staves. I think that's, as a disclaimer of like, don't do that. And like, don't like prick your finger. So many horrible complications that you can get from things like that. So that's maybe not the best idea, but like if you wanted to be traditional with it, a lot of these things talk about blood, and they talk about like ridiculously specific ingredients. You don't have to do that to use them. You can just create a symbol, write it on a bit of paper, sometimes burn it as well, because that's also this idea of like if you're burning it, you're turning it into smoke basically, and it goes off up into the universe to wherever it needs to go. So that's a lot nicer. But it's but a lot of the traditional instructions are quite gross.
Do they
like for the squeamish?
Do they get more extreme based on the amount of power that you're wanting? Does that make sense? So if you want like something really big, then you have to kind of like do something extreme.
I don't like, that's the thing. I don't think so, because I feel like that would make logical sense. But there's not, because there's some like, I feel like it's so situational as well. Or like there's so many staves where it's like carve this on a piece of oak, which also is interesting because there weren't really many oaks in Iceland, if like ever oak as a species growing in Iceland. Which then that's one thing of translation errors, where I can see that people have just directly translated the name of a tree rather than realize that like aik, like E-I-K, that's how you would spell oak in Icelandic, but it's like that also can mean like a bunch of other trees. So there's stuff that's specific to like get this piece of wood and carve this symbol on it, and then like put it in your pillow and you'll dream of whatever you want. Which like that could practically, if you follow the instructions and you get the result, that could be like life-changing information that you could receive. So there's like there's that sort of the thing of how you use it, rather than like what it's supposed to, the amount of like power it's supposed to give you. But there are some where it's like, I'm trying to think of like, there's some staves for like to kill a horse, and it's like just carve or like write this out on parchment, redden it with your blood, and like either like put it in the hoof print of the horse where it's like walked, or just like carry it with you when you're like looking at the person who's riding the horse. And it's like, I feel like if there's a meter for like how powerful something is supposed to be based on like what you've done to do it, Do you know what I mean? Like the steps
Yeah.
you've got through to like achieve that. That doesn't really exist, I think, in Icelandic stuff. It's sort of all over the place, and like, yeah, it's very. There's some stuff that's like ridiculously specific to like make a stave that will let you dream of a thief, where it's like add all these bits of blood, carve it on like some like white skin from like a calf or something, and then
Yeah.
like, and it's like you get this thing, and then it's like, oh well, I've been through all this effort for nothing. Not that I've done that specific thing, but just like one would do this and get like not a lot for the work they've put in.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's I would be really interested to like understand the minds of the people who wrote these things down.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fascinating. But then again, obviously, I guess if you're creating your own, you can maybe kind of see where they're coming from and maybe understand it a little bit, and what maybe it's a less extreme version, but maybe you can kind of understand it, I guess, to a degree, obviously without the blood.
That's the thing, because then I'm like, because blood is such a common ingredient in so many magical practices, like, and especially with like living sort of traditions of Imbanda and Kimbanda, like Afro-Brazilian spiritual practices, mostly going on in Brazil, but also in the US now. There's a lot of sort of like live animal sacrifice still happening, because they're like, oh, this is, you know, you're giving life to get something big, and then obviously that like in the West, that's not something, or like, you know, in the English speaking world, that's like, this is the villain in a fairy tale that does this sort of thing. So it's not something that we would want to do.
I
So
think
it's I don't know. Like blood is an ingredient, like as like blood is life, and I think that's a quote from Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But like, it's always about blood, I think, is what he says, because it's life.
it is
it
like
makes
the
sense,
life
but like,
force, though, isn't it? Like, especially
yeah,
to a peoples who don't understand, you know, the human autonomy and how things work. You can very much see how, like, when somebody dies, particularly by like cutting in battle, whatever, there's blood. And so you could see how you can quickly surmise like the blood coming from the body, the life going, them passing, how the blood could be the life force and therefore a very powerful thing.
I think that's where a lot of the thinking around it comes from, for sure. And it's also, I'm also partly like, is it because there's like resource scarcity is a huge thing in Iceland, and especially way in the past, it's like people didn't have really anything. Like you had to sort of, either you had to like go somewhere else and take it and bring it back, or you would have to work like for generations to build this sort of infertile farmland into like an actual place that could sustain your family for generations. And so I'm wondering, like, because there's all this stuff in Icelandic folk magic as well of sort of things that are taboo elsewhere. So you would have in lots of folk magic traditions the use of like an iron knife to gather plants or to sort of like harvest stuff. That's taboo because iron is like the sort of the symbol of human innovation, I guess, and like the iron doesn't like naturally occur like as a blade in the ground. So it's this idea of like, this is a 100% human made thing that would like be very at odds with the natural world. But in Iceland, you have the thing of like, everybody has one knife, one fork, one bowl. Like the bowl you eat with is like, in way in the past, the bowl that you ate with was a bowl that you washed yourself with, and like also did random bits of divination in, because you only had one bowl to like gaze into the water and see whatever you might see. So it's interesting of like, stuff here doesn't really work like stuff on the continent because there wasn't really the resources for stuff. So I'm wondering, like, is then the focus on blood, that's a thing because there wasn't really anything else to like to use or to work with.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth thinking that blood wasn't a taboo where it is today, because we don't see it. You know, all our meat comes, if you are a meat eater, it comes pre-packed from the supermarket in a little cellophane thing, and it doesn't look anything like the animal. We're so detached from how the animal gets from hopefully farm and not like some warehouse somewhere, from from farm to table. Like we're so detached from it, we don't see it. Whereas, back when a lot of this stuff was being made, you would keep your own animals, so you would slaughter your own animals. You would probably, I mean, only until like the Victorian times, you would have had like butchery in the street in London, and you would have like stalls, and blood would be in the, blood literally would be in the street, and we would see it, and it wouldn't be this kind of weird, off-putting thing because it's kind of there everywhere. But now we don't see blood very often, usually unless something has happened to someone. It's quite a negative situation. We've probably learned this very negative sort of reaction to blood over time because we just not. So it probably was just a common thing. It was just like the life. It's a powerful thing. Let's use it. Whereas now it's a little bit like, ooh, that's a bit odd, and it's become almost quite satanic, I guess.
I think that's like in modern culture as well. That's a big thing of like satanic panic in the US as well, of like anything that was seen as like knives or blood in relation to occultism was like, oh no, it's the devil, when like that's actually not really the way it's ever been. But yeah, that's another topic.
that certainly is another topic. So okay, so when we're talking about staves, and I guess for me, I have to go into, with my skepticism little hat on, how much of it do you think is just the intent behind doing it? So, like you said before, you write, make a stave, put it on a piece of wood, put it under the pillow, it's going to make you dream of a certain thing. How much of that do you think is because you've gone through the effort to make the stave, put it under the pillow, so you go to bed thinking about this thing that you want to dream about, so therefore it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, you're going to think about it? And to a more extent, placebo effects are a proven thing through medication. If you make somebody believe they're taking a certain drug, often they will have the effect of that drug because the human body is a very powerful thing, and if you suggest, then it can happen. So at what point do you get with like, do you think that's what's happening versus like an actual magic? But then I guess you could call that magic as well.
I think like ultimately, like the end goal, if it works, whatever way you've taken, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think like the thing for me is like, then my sort of science, not side, because I don't have a science side and a witchy side, but like the science brain will kick in a bit more of like, okay, let's repeat this experiment, and I'll be like, right, I'm fully in the zone of like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to have this information like fully come to me in my dream, because that's what this is supposed to do. And then I'll wake up and I won't remember my dream, or I'll be like, well, that wasn't at all what I was thinking of. And like, sometimes I'll look at like how I could sort of symbolically break down these things and work out like, is it then like there's some symbolism in this dream that I need to like really think about, or like just then like later in the day, like I'll see something and it will just click and I'll be like, oh, that's exactly what I was like looking for last night. So then like, is it that I've been thinking on it and that's why it's like now just clicked, or is it because I've done this thing? For me, I will be skeptical all the time, but I'll repeat stuff as well of like, if I think things that are to do with like luck and the concept of like just things happening to you, or you just sort of like receiving things, like money is one as well, especially like that's the sort of area
I bet everybody wants to steer for more money.
That's the thing. Yeah, I feel like that's the stuff where you can repeat and repeat and repeat, and it's like, when in the world do you just get handed money? Like, it doesn't happen to you. But like, if you're doing a stave to like bring in business, and then suddenly the next week you've got like loads more business, then it's like, okay, maybe then I would think like, okay, I'll repeat this like next week, see if it keeps going. Not that it's like this model of exponential growth, but like if similar things happen the next time I do it, and then I'll make a note of that. And I think that's why this is like a years long thing for me of like, I'll be skeptical, but I'll like because I make a note of stuff as well. And when I do, especially in diaries, like when I've done something, I'll be like, I did a stave tonight for this thing. And so then I'll check back in like a week and I'll be like, oh yeah, that happened, or like this thing clicked for me. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Then that didn't work, or that the time it did work, maybe it was a fluke, or maybe it was some coincidence, or so I don't know. I think for me, I try to keep the sort of, because a lot of it is not like it's spirituality, but it's not like a sort of, I don't have this necessarily like a belief that there's like a higher power guiding all this stuff. I think that the world is sort of random and chaotic, and that's nature. And so I don't tend to like put my faith in like, oh, I've done this, and so because I've done this, these higher powers are going to give me the same thing again if I do it again. I think that's setting yourself up to fail, I guess. But like, I would be just very skeptical. I would make notes of like, I've done this thing. Okay, this time this happened. Maybe that meant it worked. And there are some things like over lots and lots of experiments that I'll have like, okay, this is like now getting to the point of being like statistically improbable that it isn't working, which is nice.
Yeah.
But it's also like, that's like years and years of just trying it. And it's also like, I don't know, I think it's a lot of it I'm interested in because I'm like, oh, this is spooky and mysterious and fun. And so I just try it to see like how it goes.
So
and I get joy out of it. So it's nice.
What's the most successful one? If you want to share it, maybe you don't.
I think so. Honestly, for me, like I did like a few, because I've been writing stuff for a while now, and like I first published my first book with a different publisher, and then I was approached by another publisher. But like a couple of weeks before that, I was like, I like this writing stuff, and I want to do this in a way that will support me, and be more of my sort of occupation. And so I did like a sort of money job related spell. Using a stave that I'd made on a Thursday, because Thursday is the day of Jupiter, and Jupiter is the planetary power of wealth and expansion. I did this on that day in that time, because that's what this system sort of tells you to do. And then this other publisher that I work with now, they just appeared in my emails like the day after, and they were like, "Hey, we want to republish your book." And I was like, whoa, okay, that's weird, but like, that's great that that's happened. So like,
it is, because the skeptic in me wants to be like, not bullshit, but just be like,
but it's healthy. Like it is healthy to have the.
But I've also been in that position where things do just happen. Like, and I guess, people will just put it down as a coincidence, which maybe it is. But everybody listening to this has probably had that event happen where it's like you're thinking of something, or in that case, you want something to happen and then it just kind of does. And it's a little bit odd, and it's probably all, like I say, happened to us all, where we just go, it's a bit weird, that. And I don't really know how to explain it. And it could just, like I say, could be complete coincidence. A lot of the time we probably have it where you're thinking of somebody and then they ring you or text you. And it's maybe sometimes it's somebody that you haven't spoken to for years. I've had it where there's been people I haven't spoken to for months and months and months. And I'll just be thinking like, oh, I wonder what, and then for some reason I'll just get a message and I don't know what it is. Maybe maybe somebody could say that you both saw something on social media that was similar, that maybe reminded you of a time, and you happened to get to this point where you thought about each other, and maybe it's still, That's the only explanation I could maybe, that's the only way I could maybe try and put a logical explanation to it. So there are things that happen that are just unexplainable or weird, and just a bit like, oh man, I don't know what that is.
It's like I love it, because especially like with luck sort of stuff that's to do with like things to do with luck, or things to do with like unexpected stuff coming into your life. There's been loads of examples where I've made a stave for this thing, and then like within a week it's like, oh cool, now I have the money, because like a bunch of people bought like readings off of me for divination stuff or whatever. And it's just like, is that just because I showed up on their Instagram feed, or like is it, I don't know. It's like I love it. I think it's so, to me that's the sort of the confirmation thing. Then I'm like, okay, I'll write like a note of I did this, and then it worked. I did this, it didn't work. And like probability wise, I would say more often than not, things have worked. So it's nice, but I'm also then I wouldn't ever like, yeah, I wouldn't be like, oh well, it's 100% and it's always gonna do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Even the way it happens, I'm like, this is weird. Like this is not the way I thought this thing would like show up. But
yeah. So, yeah, it's the whole thing is it's so fascinating, because if something works, it works. And how you get there is kind of irrelevant, whether it's just through intent. And, you know, people could maybe say, we in your case, you know, if you want to do more writing, that the idea of that I want this writing thing to be successful and I want this to be my career, that even by thinking that and then kind of writing it down, you're already on that path anyway, because the intent is there. It's like, I want this. So you're already showing a lot of intent by making the Staves. So it's kind of like, oh, well, naturally you will write more, you will work harder, you put things out there. But then it's like, well, then it's working. Then the Stave has done his job. So can you separate the two?
Exactly. Yeah. I do feel like at the end of the day, all of it, like if you get what you ask for, whether you've done it yourself or not, it's worked. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we wrap up the main show, I did want to ask, like, specific to you and like your practice, what does that look like in terms of just how would you make a stave? So Claire's just popped in. So Claire, you can join us for the back end of the episode if you like. So we're talking Icelandic staves. So Claire, we're going to do an episode after this. So Albert is an ex. I don't know. Have you two met? So Albert does a lot of things with Icelandic staves. So the last question I wanted to ask was how he creates the process behind, like, putting together, getting into the mind space of creating a stave for either for yourself, or do you say you create them for other people?
Yeah.
So yeah, like what's that process?
So the way that I do it, like either there's sort of two ways. Either it's like something will sort of just come to me and I'll write it down, or like some symbol will like show up if I'm thinking of stuff, and I'll make notes of, like, I'll draw it out, various different symbols. There's that method, which sometimes is nice because then it's like, oh, this looks right and it feels right, and I haven't had to go through the long process that I normally do. But the long process that I normally do is that I'll write out a statement. The way, like, I follow this Austin Osman Spare, like his method of creating sigils. So you write down the statement of intent, and then you'll cross out like every vowel, or you'll cross out every repeated letter, and so you have a collection of letters. And then I'll go through these Icelandic like manuscripts of various like alphabet ciphers and stuff, and I'll take like, okay, take this one, this one, this one, swap those out for the letters of the Roman alphabet, and then break them down and reorganize them into a symbol. Yeah, it's very simple. There's not like much sort of witchy woo around it, other than just I feel like I'll rearrange it again and again and again until it feels right, and then if it really feels right, then I'm like, okay, this is the one. But like sometimes that takes me days to keep going until it just sort of clicks and then it feels right. Sometimes it's just like, oh, okay, that's that, and it feels like right enough to be right. So yeah, but that's the process really. It's like, it's super simple.
Okay. Yeah. So would you write, because what if the intent's like super long? I don't know, like
like even if the intent is
Just
like a whole
shorten it
paragraph,
down.
you'll
Yeah.
like cut out every repeating letter, so then you'll only have like a collection of
All right.
like
Okay.
6 or 7. So it's easier to work with. I try to keep it to like maximum a sentence because otherwise, then I feel like it's too much to juggle or condense. But
So do you get
yeah.
some customers who give you like, I want to stay for this, and it is like a fucking whole story
Mhm.
of like, basically, basically I just want everything. I want you to change my entire life and make everything better, and it's going to be wonderful from now on.
Yeah, and I'm for that. Like that's the thing because I'm still in this place of feeling a bit weird of like accepting money for readings and for staves and stuff because I'm a bit like I know what I'm doing with it and I trust that I'm not like scamming people, but I still like the skeptic in me is still a bit like, oh, like is that allowed? But like people find it really helpful. So at least I'm helping when I'm doing it. But yeah, like if it's a super long thing of like maybe 4 different like focuses, then I'll break them down and be like, okay, I'm going to do one for this, one for this, one for this. And then it's like, oh, you've only sort of like paid me for one, but I don't tend to look at it like that. And I'll be like, oh, okay, from what you've asked, I've got this and here it is. Yeah.
Wonderful. Claire, I let you unmute yourself now. I had you. I have everyone muted. Is there anything you'd like to ask before we wrap up the main show?
That was very interesting in itself, to be honest. I haven't really much to add or ask because staves are not, runes especially, are not really my area of expertise. I just enjoy listening to other people ask about it. So it's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, it has been a very fascinating episode. So yeah, let's wrap this up. We'll do a quick Q&A because I know there'll be people in the chat that want to ask you some questions. And then Claire, we will do our little bonus episode after this where I'm sure you have a cool, weird story for us once again.
Oh, it's a very weird one tonight.
Wonderful. Can you tease what it is?
I wouldn't want to tease too hard.
Okay.
There's a lot to grasp in it. Literally.
That sounds like it's going to be a naughty one, which they usually end up that way, I guess. So like I said, this is for the main show. So if you do want to listen to that and learn more, you can get on our patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast. Albert, where can people find you, follow you, get your book, plug the books?
Yeah, that's still new to me to advertise. To advertise a book. So I'm on Instagram at Sussex_Pella. And yeah, on Twitter as that as well, but I don't really use it. I'm on Patreon as Sussex Pella as well.
Nice.
And then my book Icelandic Plant Magic. It's through Crossed Crow Books. It's a US publisher, and you can just find that on crossedcrowbooks.com. My next one will be coming out not next. Now we're in 2024. My next one will be coming out in, I think, July. Not 100% sure on the final date with it yet, but in July, I think. Through the same website, so you can find my books there.
So it might be a plan that we book, because we do have to do the whole episode on plant magic. So it might be a plan to book for you to come back on around the time of the book coming out, and we can do a little thing about it.
Yeah, I'd love that.
That seems like a plan. The chat are already saying, Albert, please come back. So it's been a fun one. I find this stuff fascinating. Like I say, it is something that I'm quite skeptical about, but also try to be open-minded. But I just enjoy learning about it. So the other day I bought King James's Demonology book. I've never read it, and I'm kind of working my way through it. And it's fascinating. To be fair, I find it fascinating also the language used, like how I can read it, but pretty much none of the words are spelled how we spell them, but I can figure it out and I can read it. And it's a really fascinating little book.
It's ridiculous, is what it is. It's great.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm only on the first, because it's like 3 books in there, is it? I think so. I'm on the first one.
It's a classic case of childhood trauma, that one.
Okay.
And being brought up by Puritans.
Ah, there we go. Okay, so if you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farron1. The podcast is just Nordic Mythology Podcast on all the different platforms. YouTube, like I say, that seems to be getting more and more popular as people like to watch the episode. We also put little clips out from the shows on there. Make sure you just hit the little subscribe button. And yeah, obviously the business at Horns of Odin. So we'll jump over, do a quick Q&A, maybe like 10, 15 minutes, Albert, if you've got time.
Yeah, sure.